Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. Mike Duffy was one of Canada's best-known broadcasters, a man who was a part of almost every major political event in Canada over the past 3 decades. But he recently left the field of journalism in order to join the Senate of Canada. He represents the province of Prince Edward Island, where he was born. And Mike Duffy joins me now to talk all about life beyond politics. Senator Mike Duffy, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's great to have you here.
Well, it's great to be here. It's a show I never miss because you're the last long-form broadcast on Canadian television, and you're holding the beachhead, which is terribly important.
Well, that's nice of you to say.
Well, the business has gone sideways, and it's not serving Canadians well not to have these kinds of long-form conversations. So congratulations to CPAC and to the cable companies that fund this channel that make this possible.
Why do you think it's happening? Why do you think that we are losing these long
I think it's the
shows?
race to the bottom, a business now taken over and run by accountants. Everything's to the next quarter. What are your quarterly results? Good people being thrown overboard because they're too expensive, and bringing in the kids. And of course the kids are all young and enthusiastic, but in the process we've lost a real sense of context of the country. The CBC, which is supposed to be above all of this, is deeply into it, the chase for ratings. They've got to increase their numbers. It used to be the national news would have over 1 million viewers a night, no problem. Now they have a good night if they have 600,000, and a spectacular night if it creeps up even more on a special night. So they, in order to ensure that they continue to get $1 billion or more of government funding, they're now chasing the ratings because they have to be able to say to their masters, look, we get big audiences, therefore we're worth keeping. And so what we've done in the pursuit of ratings is we've thrown the content out the window, and the Sports Illustrated swimsuit edition becomes the #1 thing, or a dog or a cat up a tree, or a dog that can catch a baseball. Yeah. This kind of trivia dominates all of our television, and of course it expands into the other areas with the reality shows and so on, which are fine for their time, but the news and current affairs deserves to be treated seriously. Doesn't mean it has to be boring, but we can't trivialize it the way it's been done. So good for you guys for resisting that trend.
Well, anything that allows me to stay employed, I'm glad for it too.
Yeah.
But tell me what you think the long-term impact is going to be in terms of the society.
I think it makes society more cynical. I think kids have no respect. People think of the House of Commons. Somebody said about, how do you know when a politician's lying? His lips are moving. I mean, that is so off the scale because it isn't true. I mean, lots of people in politics exaggerate, but you see that in life. But what we've got here is a society which has taken the importance of civic duty, of people who serve their country. Look at the Liberals. How are they going to get somebody of substance to run for the leadership? John Manley said no, Frank McKenna said no, Brian Tobin said no. All these people who've been around the block and would have something to contribute are all running away. Why? Do you think they want to subject themselves to the kind of trash that we see day after day, intruding into people's private lives, trying to make something out of nothing? And it's going on right through society. Good people are turning away from politics because they don't want to go through the kind of stuff that they see every day in the media.
How did you see it change in your many years of journalism, and especially the stuff that you were seeing on the Hill as well?
Well, I think the big change came with the invention of what we're using right now, ENG. We're being shot by a small camera that a cameraman can hold, or a camera person on their shoulder. And that changed the whole nature of television news. Prior to ENG, electronic news gathering, we used film. And film, you shoot the film, you send it to the lab, it has to get processed, then it comes back, you have to edit the film, a physical process of chopping and cutting and pasting. It's a long, laborious process. And as long as film was there, anything that happened in the news after about 6 o'clock at night, it was too late to put it on the 10 or 11 o'clock news. It was just, you just couldn't turn it around in time unless it was just, you know, the end of the world. You could throw everything you had at it and you might get it on.
Yeah.
So ENG arrives. And so now we've got live. They're going live into the newscasts 24 hours a day from anywhere you want to be. So why would you pay for a newspaper? Before 1978 or 79, with the arrival of electronic news gathering, you had to read the paper to find out all of the news from the night before.
Right.
Because television and radio had only skimmed the surface with a little 10-second report about something that had happened. So the next day you'd read your paper, you'd pay money for a newspaper to find out more about that story. Well, when people found that they were getting it on the news instantly, and then with the arrival of all news, which came a year or two later, people said, why do I need to buy a paper? So to arrest the decline of newspapers, newspapers reinvented themselves. And they brought, in the case of Canada and Ottawa, one person came from the West Coast to Ottawa, and he changed the tone of reporting on Parliament Hill. And that person's name was Alan Fotheringham. And Alan Fotheringham was a hotshot on the West Coast who'd been a sports writer in university and a very clever wordsmith. And he came down to Ottawa and he suddenly got a national stage. And he was in every newspaper in the Southern chain, and then he went to the Globe and Mail eventually, and Maclean's Magazine and Front Page Challenge, and he became a big media star. But his approach was unique, which was that he wrote about the personalities, the appearances, and so on of people. Brian Mulroney, the jaw that walks like a man. Joe Clark and his bony fingers. This kind of personal commentary, which might be, you know, good. It certainly was glib, and it was good to attract a very superficial audience. But then you had all the people in the Parliamentary Press Gallery, another couple of hundred reporters saying, my God, he's clever with words. I'm going to be like that. And all of a sudden, you saw that politicians were being dissed. There was no respect. There was no respect for the office. I mean, I don't want to overdo it. There are still a few good, solid journalists around. But the wave for the popular media began, tearing down people, ridiculing their appearance, all this kind of stuff started with Alan Fotheringham.
Did you feel it affected you in the way that you did your own shows?
It caused the brass to say we have to be more lively, we have to be more entertaining. They didn't say, oh, you've got to go on the attack. In latter years, people were saying, why don't you attack people? And I said, that's not me, and the public aren't stupid. You put up a politician, they can figure out who you are. Just let the politician talk. What's your story? What's your story?
Right.
Two people with conflicting views. But the pressure was to get ratings, and that's where the hair jokes and the fat jokes and all of that came from, which was, don't be so reserved and uptight, be open, because you're, and especially when you have a daily program,
yeah,
the audience is your friend. They're inviting you into their house. So
right.
How are you today? Well, you know, my back's sore.
Sure.
You know, you get to a certain age, you get arthritis.
But you know what? People do like that, don't they? People feel that they know who you are.
But as long as you respect it.
Right.
But when you're going around and every politician you meet is a you know, dastardly character, that corrodes, because it isn't true. Mm-hmm. You know, it may be partly true of some people, but that corrodes public confidence in the institutions. Now, the purists in the journalism schools, most of whom are never reporters, they're lecturers and teachers, would say it's not our job to hold up the foundations of society. But I think everyone, as an individual, has a certain amount of civic responsibility, and part of that's to show respect for the society we built. And think of it, the telescope, right? Where most people look through the telescope, they see a pretty good country. We've got 7.2% unemployment or something, which is unfortunate, and we're working to make that better. But for 92% of the population, they have jobs, they're putting bread on the table, They've managed to get their kids in school. They're paying their mortgages. The weather's, whatever they say about climate change, in most places it's been warmer than ever for a cold northern country. Life is pretty good. And what's wrong with celebrating that? And you know, for those who are bilingual or who are interested, if you watch the English language television news and then watch the French language news in the province of Quebec, the Quebec news is much more positive. They don't miss the earthquakes and they don't miss the corruption and so on. They have it there. But they celebrate the greatness of Quebec. Quebec wins another gold medal at the Olympics. Not Canada, Quebec. They're proud of Quebecers. Bombardier sells another raft of planes. I saw they got an order the other day. It was phenomenal.
Very different newscasts.
How that company is doing. You know what they'd be saying in the English side about Bombardier? This company that gets millions of dollars of federal bucks, once again, you know, has got a deal to sell 300 planes to somebody somewhere else. In Quebec, they're saying, Quebec sait faire. Quebec knows how to do it. Look, this product we make, the whole world wants it. So I don't think the news is a reflection of how most Canadians feel.
Right.
And I think most Canadians find the news, eventually they get the headlines, a turnoff. Because the people who are running the news on the English side don't get it. They live in a little ivory tower in Toronto, and they don't get it.
What got you interested in being in this field? You must have had a much more positive view of it when you first started out.
Oh, well, in grade school, we had a show sort of like Reach for the Top that many, back in Charlottetown, PEI. And as a kid, I went on a spelling bee on the radio. And they had this little contest where the kids from school, you know, 10-year-olds or 11-year-olds or whatever, and we were doing that radio show in a studio in a radio station in Charlottetown that was from where Don Messer broadcast his network radio show, the country music fiddler. So we're in a studio, and over in the corner, the piano, drum set, and everything, Don Messer. And so
that must have been pretty neat.
I go in and I say, you hear this on the radio at home. There was no TV then, or it was just barely starting.
Right.
And this is where it comes from, in this room with the boom mic hanging down, the guy behind the glass, the control panel and everything. This is magic. This is magic. And then, so I was fascinated. Bite. Yeah, and I went to the school library and got up books about broadcasting. I thought, this is amazing. We're here, and people all over there are hearing it all around, and it was theater of the mind. Radio, you sort of had this vision in your mind of what you were hearing. So I got books out of the school library, read about it, read everything I could about it. In 1962, I was president of the High School Student Council, and David MacDonald, who was a cabinet minister in the federal government, his mother was a TV, Small World PEI, was a producer at the TV station.
Right.
She called the high school where I was and spoke to me as the president of the Students' Council and said, we're starting a TV show in the fall of 1962, and who would you recommend to be your school representative on this show?
And you said
me. And I said, Mrs. MacDonald, you're talking to him. So we set up, they got a group of kids together. The radio station, the TV station had arrived by then. They were so wonderful because they let the kids do it.
Everything.
Right? She was the mother hen, the producer, but she didn't tell us what to do. We had meetings. First thing you got to decide, what are you going to call the show? So, I don't know, and everybody, there were three of us, Mate McIsaac and Diane McClellan and myself, and they're still in PEI and we're old friends. So what do you call it? Well, somehow we came up with the idea, Club 62. And Henry Purdy, who was a prominent local artist, but who was then the graphic artist at the TV station, took our pictures, and with a Bolex camera, frame by frame, animation in the camera, made an animated opening for Club 62 using camera cards and pictures of us and whatever. And he made them dance around by shooting 2 or 3 frames at a time on this roll of black and white film. There's only one problem. We start in September of 1962. In January, we're in 1963.
You weren't Club 62 anymore.
But we couldn't afford to redo the animation, which had cost about $35. And that's, in those days, that was big money.
Sure.
So for 2 years, we were Club 62 all the way into 1964. And so that's why first, and it was live.
Did you ever change it? Did it ever become something else?
No, it was Club 62.
No.
And we never explained why.
Yeah.
It just kept on going. And the theme music was a swingin' safari. I think it was Billy Vaughn on Dot Records. And so then I had something to do other than school.
Right.
I was full-time. I go to school, but I was working on items for the show. And so I've been in television ever
since then. Did you know right then that that's what you wanted to do?
Oh, it was more fun than almost anything.
Yeah. So tell me about then, there was a really, because it wasn't always easy for you, was it? I mean, you, like any young person going into a field, you face your fair share of rejection and people who don't necessarily want to back you up. We've all been there. But
well, the radio station, you know, I was on this show, but they wouldn't hire me on the radio as a full-time employee because I didn't have a deep voice.
Isn't that something?
Oh, yeah. And the women's movement gave me my break and all kinds of other men. Well, when you think about it, back in the day, well, let me assure you, you're like my daughter Miranda, too young. But back in the day, everyone on radio had a very deep voice.
Sure.
And the women had deep voices, too. They found, 1 in 10,000 women who sounded...
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. There was a woman on the CBC named Maggie Morris. Oh, she had a great set of pipes. And so this was considered critically important because you're a performer, you're an actor, what you're putting out there really is your voice and your ability to read. So you want something that's pleasing. So many, many, many women who had things to say and didn't want to be confined to a recipe show, here's a recipe for an apple pie, who had thoughts on everything, were being denied their rightful place on the air because of the sound issue. So the women's movement in the United States started pushing to say, listen, we need more women on the air. Women deserve their share. And sure enough, the sound of American radio changed, and the sound of Canadian radio changed when women came on board. Well, guess what? A rising tide raises all boats. When lighter voices of women began being heard, men with lighter voices got a chance as well. So all of a sudden, I went from the back rooms, writing scripts and being the high school guy, this came years later, I got a chance on radio. And on a couple of stations.
Is that what you wanted, radio? Or were you just happy with anything?
I was happy with anything.
Yeah.
But radio seemed the most available. And so I go to Halifax, and I go to work on the weekends at this radio station, CJCH 920 radio. And I was so busy trying to get my voice down. And I was there for 3 months working Saturday and Sunday night, making $15 a shift, and living at the Y, where the rent was $30 a week. And I'll never forget Claire Buckley, who was the director of the Halifax Y, allowed me to stay there. And the way I wasn't overweight then, the way I ate was Olin's had a hockey team in training camp. And so I knew all the guys, or got to know all the guys in the Y, residential Y on South Park Street in Halifax. And so they'd say, oh, Joe isn't here, so I'd sign Joe's name and have lunch, and then go up and hang out at the station. But my 2 shifts were Saturday and Sunday. And my first paycheck, Bob McLeave, who was an MP and was the news director, had been defeated and went back and then came back to Parliament. Robert McLeave was the news director, and he hired me for this weekend Saturday, Sunday shift at $15 each. And I get my first paycheck after 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm desperate for the money because I have to pay the Y. And the check comes, and it's made out to Mike Gillis, not Mike Duffy. Mike Gillis was the fisheries broadcaster at the CBC down the street. And Bob McLeave, the absent-minded professor, had told him, "I've hired Mike, that Irish guy, Mike Gillis."
So what'd you do?
I ran down to the CBC, of course I was such a dummy. I ran down to the CBC to get Mike Gillis to sign the check so I could go over it. And,
pay your rent.
Yeah. And, of course, I could have forged Mike Gillis. Nobody would know him, but I was a kid from PEI. Anyway, at the end of 3 months,
there's a story here about how you ended up...
the men in suits came to me and said, "Mike, you're a great kid, but your on-air delivery is terrible. So our advice to you is to go to a small station somewhere and practice and practice and practice, and then you can make it in the big time in Halifax."
And someone drove you.
So Harris Sullivan, who's living near Moncton, was then the star on the sports on the radio. And Harris drove me in the station Volkswagen out to the end of the Bicentennial Highway and gave me $5 and said, "You know, you go, kid. You practice.
Good luck.
Yeah, and you'll be all right. You know, it'll work out." So I'm hitchhiking from Halifax to the ferry in Pictou to go home, but it's December, and anyway, there weren't many rides, so I end up in Truro at 5:30 or 6 o'clock. I can't get to the ferry in time because they shut down for the evening. So what am I going to do? I got $5. That's all I've got to my name. Where am I going to sleep? What am I going to do? So I go into the police station because I had heard somewhere in my travels that vagrants or indigents stayed in the jail. So I go in and tell the sergeant at the police station my story. I'm in my little suit and tie and my little suitcase.
An unlikely vagrant.
Yeah. Anyway, he said, no, you're not going in the jail. He said, we have a lounge upstairs and you can sleep on the sofa and there's a washroom there. So to do that, I then grabbed my clippings from the newspaper because while all of this was going on Club 62, I'm writing stuff in the local paper in Charlottetown. So I bring my clippings in my scrapbook and I go down to the local radio station. And it's 5:30 or 6 o'clock and the management's gone. But I go in and Graham Wiley was the disc jockey and he said, we don't have an opening here, but you know in Amherst, we just bought the radio station in Amherst 100 miles down the road and they're looking for a news guy.
What luck.
So I left my scrapbook, went down to the bus station. I needed $2.50 for the car ferry. So I had a hamburger and a Coke. They sent the scrapbook, God bless them, up to Amherst. A few days later, I hitchhiked the next day to the ferry. My parents picked me up. My father says, you know, this broadcasting thing isn't working. You should really
go to law school.
You should really buckle down.
Yeah.
He said, there's a January, you're interested in electronics. There's a January thing starting, you can learn to become an electrician.
Wonderful.
Because you can't get into university in January, right? You can't go back from whence I had been dismissed.
Chucked.
Because they said I was a Christmas graduate at St. Dunstan's. Because they said, you know, you're all media all the time, you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, he said, you can't restart at St. Dunstan's in January, so why don't you take this course in electrician, become an electrician. And I said, yeah, maybe I'll do that, not having any intention. But the phone rang, and Tom Toner in Amherst phoned me and said, why don't you come over and we'll have a chat. So I pack up my little bag, and this time took the Acadian Lines bus. And instead of making $15 a shift, I was hired for the princely sum of $75 a week.
Wow. You'd hit the big time.
And all the airtime. The most important thing was all the airtime you wanted. Because I started off, I was supposed to prepare the news and do reports because I couldn't read a newscast on the air. Well, that lasted about 3 weeks. And somebody was sick and I filled in. And then
you know, you've had such an interesting career, too. I mean, from those experiences, those early experiences, even just with Club 62, to being one of the most nationally recognized Canadian broadcasters, someone that Canadians just automatically put together with politics. If something's happening, well, let's watch Duffy. So I'd be interested to know from your perspective and all the people that you've interviewed and the history that you've seen, have you had a best interview? Is there someone who was really one of the most interesting people for you to interview?
Can I tell you the worst?
Please do. That was going to be my next question, so by all means.
Well, one thing about being fired,
yeah.
and then I had another incident of that afterwards, being
yeah.
told you weren't good enough and so on, keeps you humble, right? It also makes you say, how do I do better,
right.
do my job better? What is it I have to work on?
Sure.
It's like an Olympic athlete
yeah.
or whatever. So many people have disappointments in their lives and they
yeah.
give up. My message is don't ever give up. If you know what you want to do and you have some skill at it, work on that skill.
Right.
And analyze the job you want.
But work seems to be a key for you because you have a very strong work ethic.
Well, part of that is you don't want to lose it because you're a lazy guy, right? I mean, I wanted it so much. And I looked at what other people did and how they got there and what their qualifications were and how could I match up my qualifications with them, with what they'd done. So if you have aspirations, whether it's in sports or anything else in life, look at role models and how did they do it. And the number one thing you find is they work hard.
Yeah.
Is that they, it doesn't just happen. Anyway.
Yeah, we got our 1 minute left. Tell me your worst interview.
1 minute?
I know. Oh, that's why the long format flies by.
The worst interview was Mother Teresa. God love her.
He does.
So I'm working with all of these young people, and we have this interview planned with Mother Teresa. And so the kids are all working up their questions. Abortion. How can there be a loving God if we're going to have war? I mean, all of these profound questions. And they're saying to me, Duff, you really got to do this. And I'm thinking, how? What can I? So anyway, we go in and we sit down just like this. And I said, Mother, Sister Teresa, whatever, about war, trust Jesus.
Oh, great.
And then I said, put your trust in Jesus.
That was the whole interview?
That was the whole interview.
Wow. That's sticking to message.
and when I tried to raise this stuff that was controversial, it made me look bad, and she looked so calm and equanimous, and it made me look like you're some kind of a heretic or whatever, don't you get it?
Right.
So
terrible.
Don't, just be
Did you
yourself.
cut it short, or what did you do?
Ran it. A lesson there for all of us.
Which is?
Well, be humble and accept people as they are. And if she's this great person for all these reasons, she has somehow reconciled these conflicts.
Yeah.
It's not for me to say she's wrong.
Sure.
And obviously, as we found out later, she did have lots of internal turmoil. Yeah. But she wasn't going to share them in public there.
So she wouldn't have been a good guest on Beyond Politics then.
Oh, well, she tried. Let's share her word. Trust Jesus.
Trust Jesus. Thank you for being here. I'm sorry we haven't had longer. Maybe we can have another discussion and another half hour to cover more.
These rants, don't get them started.
Oh, no, that's okay. I think they're pretty entertaining for the average viewer.
God
Great
bless.
to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you.